Before we begin, listen closely. If stories like this matter to you, stories that walk the thin line between faith and fear, between heaven and hell, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and stay with me until the end. And as you listen, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and how far these videos are reaching across the world. Your comments tell me these stories are being heard and remembered. Now, let me ask you something. What would you do if the devil offered you a drink? Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but a real cup, a real poison, held by human hands, yet prepared by something far darker. Because in 16th century Spain, one man lifted that cup and drank. St. Louis Bertrand did not scream. He did not collapse. He did not even flinch. And that is where the story truly begins. Spain in the early 1500s was a land of contradictions. Cathedrals rose toward heaven while fear crawled through the streets below. The Inquisition burned heretics in public squares, yet whispers of secret cults, forbidden doctrines, and demonic alliances slipped through monasteries like cold drafts under locked doors. Faith was not gentle in this era. It was violent, absolute, and constantly under siege. It was into this world that Louis Bertrand was born in 1526 in Valencia. From the moment he could speak, those around him sensed something unsettling about the boy. Not because he was cruel or strange, but because he was too serious. While other children played, Louis prayed. While others laughed, he listened. He stared at crucifixes not with comfort, but with intensity, as if the suffering carved into the wood spoke directly to him. His mother once found him alone in a dark room, kneeling before a candle, whispering words no child should know. When she asked who taught him to pray like that, he replied simply, "They do not want me to stop." "Who?" she asked. Louis looked up. "The ones who are angry." From a young age, he was plagued by dreams, visions of distorted faces, shrieking laughter, and hands clawing at him from beneath the earth. He woke screaming, drenched in sweat, convinced that something waited just beyond the edge of sight. Yet instead of driving him away from faith, these experiences pulled him deeper into it. By his teens, Louis entered the Dominican order, a religious community known not just for preaching, but for combating heresy. This was no coincidence. The Dominicans were trained to confront lies, false prophets, and, when necessary, demonic influence. And Louis excelled with disturbing ease. He fasted to the point of collapse. He slept on wooden boards. He scourged himself in private, believing pain sharpened the soul. Other monks whispered that he was excessive, unbalanced, even dangerous to himself. But his superiors noticed something else. Whenever Louis preached, people changed. Hardened men wept openly. Women collapsed, trembling. Confessions spilled out like blood from a wound. And occasionally, something far worse happened. People screamed, not cries of emotion, but voices that were not their own. Growls, laughter, words spoken in languages no one present understood. Louis did not panic when this happened. He did not call for help. He stepped closer and spoke. Those present later said his voice changed, not louder, but heavier, as if the air itself thickened around him. He commanded whatever hid inside those bodies to reveal itself. And sometimes it did. This reputation spread fast, too fast. By the time Louis was ordained a priest, enemies were already watching him. Not just skeptics, not just heretics, but men who believed the church itself was corrupt, who despised the Dominicans, and who whispered. At first, it felt like peace. Too much peace. When Louis Bertrand returned to his monastery after the night of the poisoned wine, the brothers expected him to collapse. They watched his skin for discoloration, his hands for tremors, his breath for weakness. Instead, he walked calmly through the stone corridors, greeted each monk by name, and knelt for prayer as if nothing had happened. But Louis felt it. The absence. No whispers. No pressure in his chest. No weight on his thoughts. The demons that once mocked him in dreams had vanished without a trace. For days, even weeks, he slept undisturbed. And that terrified him more than any nightmare ever had. Because Louis knew the enemy. Demons did not retreat unless they were preparing something worse. He wrote in his journal that silence was never neutral. It was a gathering breath before a scream. The first sign came late one night while he prayed alone in the chapel. The candles burned steady, the stone walls unmoving. As he whispered the psalms, A sudden cold swept through the room, extinguishing every flame at once. Darkness swallowed the altar. And then, footsteps. Slow, bare, wet. Louis stood, heart steady, eyes adjusting to the dark. The footsteps circled him but revealed nothing. Then a voice spoke, not from one direction, but from all around him. "You drank what was meant for death." Louis answered calmly. "It was not meant for me." The voice laughed, not loud, but layered, as if many mouths spoke at once. "It was meant for obedience." The chapel filled with the stench of iron and rot. Louis felt fingers brush his neck, his wrists, his spine, testing him, measuring him. The voice whispered scriptures twisted just enough to feel wrong, truths bent into blades. "You preach authority," the voice hissed, "but you live because we allowed it." Louis fell to his knees, not in fear, but in defiance. He pressed his forehead to the stone floor and prayed aloud, naming Christ, naming the cross, naming every wound of the passion. The air trembled, the pressure intensified, and then silence again. The candles relit themselves. Louis remained kneeling long after dawn. From that night forward, the attacks became personal, not dramatic, not theatrical, intimate. He heard whispers while eating, telling him the food was poisoned. He heard laughter during Mass, mocking every word of consecration. When he closed his eyes to pray, faces appeared, distorted reflections of people he loved, their mouths sewn shut, their eyes accusing. Worst of all were the dreams. In them, Louis walked through endless corridors lined with doors. Every door bore his name. Behind each one, he heard screams, voices he recognized. Parishioners, penitents, people he had failed to save. Whenever he opened a door, the screaming stopped, and he stood alone. He woke every night soaked in sweat, convinced that the demons were no longer trying to kill him. They were trying to break his certainty. Word of his survival spread across Spain, and with it came pilgrims and possessed. They arrived shaking, screaming, bound in chains, or dragged by desperate families. Some had been rejected by other priests. Some had worsened after failed exorcisms. All of them reacted violently to Louis's presence. One woman collapsed at his feet the moment he entered the room. Her body convulsed, her spine arching unnaturally. When she spoke, it was not her voice. "You should have died," it said. "Louis, now listen. Because some battles St. Louis Bertrand fought were never written down. Not because they didn't happen, but because no one else survived the room to tell the story." After the failed attempts to break his faith with whispers and doubt, the attacks against Louis Bertrand changed in nature. They became surgical, targeted, calculated. The demons no longer announced themselves with chaos or noise. They waited. They studied him. They learned his habits, his prayers, his moments of exhaustion. And then, they struck when no one was watching. Louis began requesting solitude during certain exorcisms, not out of pride, but necessity. He wrote that the presence of others often intensified the violence inflicted on the possessed, as if the demons fed on the fear of witnesses. Alone, he could focus. Alone, he could endure what others could not. Those sessions were locked behind thick wooden doors, and what happened inside leaked out anyway. Brothers reported hearing screams that didn't sound human, screams layered atop each other, overlapping, echoing in ways stone walls should not allow. The floor beneath the rooms vibrated. Candles in nearby corridors extinguished themselves. Once, a monk pressed his ear to the door and recoiled, pale and shaking, claiming he heard Louis arguing with something that spoke back using his own voice. Hours later, Louis would emerge, barely standing, his habit soaked with sweat, his face gray, his eyes hollowed as if he had not slept in years. He never spoke of what happened. He only requested water and prayer. One night, however, a young novice disobeyed orders. Curiosity and fear drove him to peer through a crack in the door during an exorcism. Louis insisted on performing alone. What he saw haunted him until his death. Inside the room, the possessed man was not restrained. He knelt calmly in the center of the floor, smiling. Louis stood opposite him, holding no book, no crucifix, only his hands clasped tightly in prayer. The novice heard the possessed man speak clearly. "You drank the cup," he said, "so now drink the truth." Louis stiffened. The man's body began to contort slowly, deliberately, bones shifting under skin, joints bending beyond human limits without breaking. His smile widened impossibly. "You think you fight us," the voice continued, "but you are merely postponed." Luis shouted commands in the name of Christ. The response was laughter. Then something happened that the novice could never explain. The shadows in the room began to detach from their owners. They stretched upward, crawling along the walls, forming shapes that did not correspond to any body present. Faces emerged from darkness, dozens of them, each whispering a different failure, a different regret from Luis's past. Moments he doubted, people he could not save. The novice fled before he could see more. When the door finally opened hours later, the possessed man was unconscious but alive. Luis collapsed in the hallway. For 3 days, he could not speak. During this period, Luis's health deteriorated rapidly. He suffered violent fevers, bleeding from the nose and ears, sudden loss of vision, and crushing chest pain. Physicians found no cause. Other priests whispered that the poison he drank years earlier was finally claiming him. Luis knew better. This was not poison. It was retaliation. The demons had shifted strategy once again. If they could not kill him swiftly, they would erode him slowly. They would let his body fail piece by piece while keeping his mind fully aware. In moments of weakness, Luis began to experience something far worse than pain. Revelations. During prayer, images forced themselves into his mind, visions of the future. He saw towns he had not yet visited, already corrupted. He saw false teachers rising after his death. He saw exorcisms that would fail because the priests lacked conviction. And he saw himself, older, weaker, forgotten. The demons used these visions to torment him. "See," they whispered, "you delay nothing." One night, during a fever, Luis screamed so violently that monks rushed to his cell. They found him clawing at his chest, shouting that something was inside him. For the first time in his life, he feared the unthinkable. What if the poison had done more than fail? What if it had marked him? Luis begged God aloud to cleanse him, to reveal the truth. And in that desperation, something answered. Not with comfort, but with clarity. He saw Christ, not glorified, not radiant, but broken, bleeding, silent. The image did not speak. It simply endured. Luis understood. Victory was not escape. Victory was endurance. From that moment on, his exorcisms changed. He no longer demanded demons to flee immediately. He forced them to remain, to answer questions, to confess their lies, to expose their strategies. These confrontations were brutal. Demons retaliated by attacking the bodies they inhabited, trying to make Luis stop. He did not. Witnesses reported possessed individuals screaming prophecies, naming Luis's future sufferings in detail. They mocked his approaching death. They described the manner of his decay. Luis listened, and continued anyway. By the end of this period, it became clear. The demons feared him not because he was powerful, but because he was unwilling to retreat. And so they prepared their final move. Something older, something patient, something that had waited since the night he drank the poisoned wine. Now listen carefully, because St. Louis Bertrand did not fall in battle. He wore down. After years of confrontations that left no witnesses, Louis Bertrand began to withdraw, not from faith, but from the world. His body had become unreliable. His hands shook during Massachusetts. His vision blurred without warning. Some mornings, he woke unable to stand without help. Those who loved him begged him to rest, to step away, to let younger priests take his place. Luis refused. He had learned something the demons never understood. Retreat does not always look like surrender. Sometimes it looks like silence. Luis reduced his public preaching. He stopped traveling. The possessed no longer arrived at the monastery gates in crowds. To outsiders, it looked like the war had ended. It had not. The attacks simply changed one last time. No more screams. No more shadows on the walls. No more voices in the night. Instead, peace. A peace so complete it felt wrong. Luis wrote that the demons had learned restraint, that they no longer needed to frighten him. They wanted him to relax, to believe the danger had passed, to lower his guard just enough for doubt to seep in. And doubt did come, not about God, but about meaning. What had all this suffering accomplished? How many souls had truly been saved? How many would fall after he was gone? Those questions haunted him more than any apparition ever had. Then, near the end of his life, it happened. Luis was invited to share a meal, nothing formal, nothing public. Just bread, wine, companionship. the kind of simple human moment he had denied himself for years. He hesitated. The memory of the first poisoned cup never left him. But he accepted. As the wine was poured, Louis felt it. The same pressure in his chest he had felt decades earlier. The same stillness. The same recognition. Not fear. Recognition. He lifted the cup and stared into it for a long time. Those present assumed he was lost in prayer. In truth, he was listening. And the voice returned. Not mocking. Not cruel. Gentle. "You've endured enough," it whispered. "You proved your point. Rest now." Louis understood the temptation immediately. This was not a test of courage. This was a test of discernment. The wine was not poison this time. Not physically. It carried something else. Permission to stop. Louis drank. And nothing happened. No collapse. No miracle. No resistance. Only time. From that day on, his strength faded rapidly. There were no dramatic signs, no visible attacks. Just a steady decline. The demons had learned the most efficient weapon of all. Patience. Louis Bertrand died quietly in 1581. No screams. No exorcisms. No final confrontation. Just breath. And then none. Those who were with him said his face was peaceful, but marked with exhaustion, as if he had finished holding something heavy for a very long time. After his death, something strange happened. Reports of possession in the regions he once traveled dropped sharply. Heretical movements collapsed without explanation. Places known for spiritual unrest fell silent. Not cured, silent. Years later, during the investigation into his sanctity, witnesses testified to something chilling. Demons expelled by other exorcists reportedly screamed Louis's name, not in triumph, but in anger. They referred to him as the one who would not leave. Only then did the church understand. St. Louis Bertrand did not defeat demons by overpowering them. He defeated them by outlasting them. The poison wine did not kill him. The whispers did not break him. The silence did not deceive him. And when the final temptation came, not as fear, but as rest, he accepted death not as defeat, but as release. So remember this. Evil does not always roar. Sometimes it waits for you to lie down. And sometimes, the holiest victory is simply refusing to leave the field until the end.